How's it going, everyone? My name's Donovan, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the phrase, if it makes you feel better. The phrase, if it makes you feel better, tends to show up, and certain people use it when they want to make other people feel better about a certain situation. Now, I want to kind of dissect this phrase because I don't think it does what people think it does. And by that I mean it's not really helpful. And in this video, I'm going to cover 3 specific reasons that it doesn't really help in the way that you expect. So, one thing to start thinking about before I go into the reasons is the intent of saying this phrase. And I think underlying this phrase is 2 things. One is you're trying to get the other person to feel some gratitude, right? If it makes you feel better, then you insert, the thing. And maybe to make it a little more concrete, if someone says, I lost my job, you might hear the response of, if it makes you feel better, 1,000 other people lost their jobs too. So, underlying that, it seems like there is a place for some gratitude or normalization. And in that specific example, it's normalization. Now, this is something that tends to make people feel a little better, right? If they can find something they're grateful for, or if they can find or see that it's a normal experience and they're not the only one going through it. However, using the phrase, if it makes you feel better, tends not to work in that way, especially when it's used directly after someone says something. So, going back to that example, I just lost my job. If it makes you feel better, 1,000 other people lost their job. Let's go into the 3 reasons that this doesn't really work out correctly. So the first reason is that it doesn't really acknowledge the experience. It skips right past it. So if I say I just lost my job and you tell me that other people lost their job, you're not telling me that you heard that sucks for me. And in any interaction, acknowledgement is something that's really important, right? Like, that's a pretty basic part of communication, is wanting to be heard. And when you say, if it makes you feel better, it feels like you're jumping right past what I said into some sort of a solution. So that's an important general idea, which is that when you're having a conversation with someone, especially around an emotional topic, that you might want to say, if it makes you feel better in, the first thing you want to do is acknowledge their experience. Jumping straight to a solution or some other thing that you think they should be thinking about doesn't really help. And in fact, it can make things worse when it feels like, since they've confided in you, that they're not really being heard or paid attention to. Now, the second reason that this phrase usually doesn't work is that it tends to also focus on other negative things that don't help. Now, again, maybe the underlying intent is to produce gratitude, but it doesn't really work in this way when you bring up another negative thing. So again, if it's, I lost my job, well, I lost my job and I haven't been able to find a new one, if it makes you feel better, that doesn't help, right? And not only does it not help, it introduces an extra negative thing to think about. So to make a little bit more sense of that, if I just lost my job and you tell me you also lost your job and haven't been able to find a new one, now I'm dealing with, I lost my job and that sucks. And also, it doesn't do anything for me that you have had the same experience. It doesn't make my experience better. And also, it has a little bit of one-upsmanship, right? Like, look at this even worse thing that happened. And it could produce the opposite effect, which is making someone feel bad for feeling bad, instead of helping them feel grateful that their situation isn't the worst possible one. So it's all about kind of the frame and the mindset, right? If it makes you feel better, doesn't have enough context, it doesn't have enough nuance to generally produce gratitude. Now, it could happen sometimes it might make people feel better, but it's just an unreliable phrase or an unreliable way of thinking, since it tends to not work. Basically, in the worst case, what happens is you not only don't help them, you make them feel worse by either pointing them to negativity or to some other experience that's not their own. The third reason that if it makes you feel better tends not to work is because it's kind of an external imposition of what you think they should be grateful for, right? So if I say I just lost my job and you say, if it makes you feel better, I just lost my job and haven't been able to find one for 6 months, the implication, the gratitude implication is that, oh, you should feel grateful that you haven't also been searching for 6 months and haven't been able to find anything like I have. And when you use that kind of implication, you're basically saying this is what you should be grateful for, which is not that effective as opposed to kind of guiding the other person towards something that they might be grateful for. So, in the ideal situation, it would look something closer to acknowledging the experience. Wow, it really sucks that you lost your job. Maybe kind of working through that a little bit more conversation there, and then guiding the conversation to, well, that's already happened. Is there anything that you can think of that you're grateful for? Is there any good that's going to come out of this? That way, it's an open ended question, and the person can kind of let their mind find what they feel grateful for and find something that will reliably produce the feeling instead of us as the person on the other end saying, here's a thing to be grateful for. Because that may or may not land, and if it doesn't land, it again not only doesn't produce the intended effect, but it has the potential of making the other person feel worse, right? Like, you should be grateful for this. Well, if I don't feel it, then what does that mean? So overall, saying if it makes you feel better to try to normalize or produce gratitude doesn't really tend to work out that well. There are other pathways that are a little bit more reliable. Again, it can work every once in a while, but more often than not, it's going to produce a consequence that you don't intend. It's much better to focus on acknowledging the experience and kind of helping the person through what they have. That phrase, basically anything that starts with "if it makes you feel better," is going to be rough. Now, of course, it could, you could end it with like, "if it makes you feel better, there are other jobs that I know about that you could apply for," and that's a little bit more useful. But that tends not to be how the phrase actually gets used. And again, just in general, there's a lot of nuance and a lot of problems that can arise, so it's probably better to just pick a different strategy or approach or phrasing that you can use to help someone through a tough time. As always, I like to kind of end with a couple actions or reflection questions. So for this video, they are the following. 1. How often do you use the phrase "if it makes you feel better"? 2. How can you better validate other people's experiences? 3. What other methods might you employ to try to help others feel grateful during hard times? Those are just a couple ideas to help you start thinking about this topic. That's all I've really got for the video. As always, if you have any questions, comments, topics you want me to cover, throw them down in the box below. I'll get to them as soon as I can, and I will see you next time.
You can check out more content at howtohappy.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date on the videos. We've also got a Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook that you can check out. Reflect, take action, and enjoy life. See you next time.